So, picture the number 33,000. That's not really a ton of views, YouTube speaking, but for context, my last video before that one is sitting at around 200 views. So I would definitely consider that blowing up. First of all, thank you? I was not expecting that at all. That's wild to me. I just occasionally make videos about random things that interest me, and this was just one of them. So I really appreciate all the support that it got. I have more stuff that I'm working on right now that'll hopefully be done before too long. But the thing about making a video that stays on topic and flows narratively is that you have to cut a lot of stuff, especially in my case because I go on a lot of tangents. That combined with some of the genuinely good comments I got made me want to cash in on that video, do a follow-up before moving on to other topics. So this is gonna be one more Penguin video before we do something else, and this is gonna be even less organized than the last one, so buckle in. First off, some quick corrections. This one isn't even related, really, but a couple people pointed out to me that Creeper is not a villain, like I said. He's an anti-hero at most. I did know that, I promise. I conflate him with villains sometimes because I talk about him in the same conversations with them a lot, but it's just not accurate. It would be like calling Deadpool a villain. Another thing I said was this. It's funny to me that in the Scrapped Writer's Bible notes, it makes specific mention that Penguin only uses people to get what he wants and then throws them away, because it consistently ended up being the complete opposite. It's someone who desperately wants human connection from someone, almost anyone, but won't find it anywhere. And this phrasing was bothering me a little bit because it's the one part that I think sounds too sympathetic. In that video I did want to highlight the tragedy, but ultimately the point in saying that was that the bitterness can be equally as dangerous, maybe even more so at times. His sadness and rejection just makes his crimes of passion instead of calculation. It's the reason his extreme retaliation we see in so many versions works, but that's the opposite of what the Bible said. That's just the point I was trying to make with that one. Those were the main two things I wanted to correct. But in terms of other comments, you guys also had some great contributions. From appreciating a physically deformed design being allowed to be well-spoken and respectable instead of inherently gross and animalistic, to a reading of the rogues through the lens of Jervis's Wonderland, with Oswald as the walrus. That's actually genius. Aquatic animal connection aside, the walrus's role in that book is literally as an imposter. If I ever go back and read the Wonderland books, like I've kind of been wanting to, I want to come back to this. I'm invested in this reading. But my favorite comment was actually this one that said that when they were a kid they didn't know who Paul Williams was, and thought that Penguin's voice was someone doing an impression of Hal Robbins. Now that name sounded really familiar, but it was throwing me through a loop because Google wasn't giving me any results until I remembered that Harry S. Robbins also goes by Hal. And if you don't know who Harry S. Robbins is, yes you do, because that's the voice of Dr. Kleiner, and
I am not much of a public speaker, but I'll do my best. Just because you mundane miscreants have no drama in your souls.
yeah, okay, I see it, that tracks. This maybe wasn't the most insightful, but it made me laugh, so I wanted to mention it. But the biggest, I guess, drawback of that video is that I actually have thoughts on a lot of versions of Penguin. I just wanted to focus specifically on Batman the Animated Series writing of him. But I do have thoughts on quite a few others. Not all of the others, this isn't comprehensive, but since we're on the topic, I decided I wanted to talk about some of them.
On to Act 2.
I mentioned this before, but I really don't like his redesign, or I guess technically the original design. God, this is confusing. But it's so boring looking. Like all of the new Batman Adventures designs, really. It's so stripped down. I hate the little dot eyes, I hate that all the glasses look like empty frames now, and I don't like his cunty posture, to be honest. And more importantly, like I mentioned, I don't think Williams' voice fits nearly as well. I can see it for the weird little sewer-dwelling freak, and the more sensitive gentleman that we sometimes get to see of him, but not for this brash, cold, to-the-point businessman. And I feel like someone's going to bring up Swan, a character that Paul Williams also played, that does share a lot of superficial similarities to this version of Penguin, and I fucking love Swan. But the reason Swan works and this doesn't is because Swan isn't brash or demanding, because he doesn't have to fight for anything. Not to spoil the movie, but he has everything completely sorted for his entire fucked up immortal life, so he just gets to sit back and watch the chaos, essentially. Williams' performance fits because it's relaxed, and it's one of the reasons it comes off as even more cruel.
Oh, Bossman, I thought you liked her.
I do. She's perfect. But you know how I abhor perfection in anyone but myself.
But respectfully, he's not commanding. TNBA feels like he needs a voice more like, I don't know, Clancy Brown or David Ogden Stiers. Hey, wait, what the fuck?
How dare you! Release me at once, you harridan, or I'll...
Yeah, it still feels weird and wrong to recast any of these characters given how connected they are to these voice actors in people's mind, but Stiers' voice fits so much better. Hollow praise, I guess, because no one saw Mystery of the Batwoman. The bigger crime, though, as someone else mentioned, is that they really don't give him anything to do after this redesign. Beat-Ass Penguin might have had really scattered random plots, but at least he got some, and some pretty solid ones, I think. But TMBA really doesn't get to do shit. He's absolutely wasted. I do like The Ultimate Thrill as an episode. I actually have a cell of it on my wall, but I just like it for Roxy. Penguin doesn't get to do shit in that one either. It's just really disappointing.
I am not a human being! I am an animal!
I have mixed thoughts about Batman Returns, the movie and its version of Penguin. Like most of Danny DeVito's roles, his energy is just so infectious, and the makeup itself is so stellar that it's really fun to watch. Absolutely revolting and horrid. I love it. I also love that these penguins are just chilling. They're just around. I love when animals get to be used as set dressing in movies. They have no idea what's going on. Someone accused me of not being nuanced enough to understand how DeVito's Penguin can be sympathetic while still being horrible, which is, 1, impressive because I really didn't talk about this film in the previous video, and 2, ironic, because that's something I specifically like about this movie. I like a lot of how his anger is portrayed. An applicable counterpoint, I think, is actually the movie Joker. One thing that did bother me in that film is, despite how it's supposed to be more serious than this one, is that Joker doesn't always behave like how a person pushed to the point of snapping would actually act like. His thinking is so clear and clear-cut, it's almost like how a child imagines the cycle of abuse perpetuating, and cements this movie more in the territory of wish fulfillment in my eyes than an actual character study.
You were the only one that was ever nice to me. Yeah.
Genuinely, I mean this. It feels much more realistic and nuanced to have someone who has been this put upon to react as aggressively as Penguin does when they feel like they're being questioned.
Great speech, Oswald.
Even just psychologically speaking, when you're always in defense mode, if that's how you've been trained to respond to stimuli, being questioned or mildly criticized is met with an attack because to your brain, you've had to fight to survive. And Batman Returns gets that. And I like that he's not palatable because that's really irrelevant. The discrimination he supposedly puts up with would still be wrong even if he's unlikable. But here's my issue. This is why I wanted to take this video down and re-edit it, because I already don't agree with the point I originally made here. As I was looking at footage from the original movie as I was editing it, I already felt the point getting weaker, and when other people pointed it out, I didn't really have a comeback. They were right. So what I said here originally was that this scene made Oswald seem too angry. It made him seem like he was born evil, which defeated the whole point of his arc, and frames everything bad that happens to him in the story as justified, or at least retaliatory in some way. And where I'm at now, I still think that's technically true with this scene. I don't think this scene was done well. Since it's literally the first time we see this kid do anything, I think it sets him up to look aggressive and comes across as way more like a possessed horror movie baby than a rightfully angry victim of abuse. But the thing is, that's pretty clearly what they were trying to do. That's definitely what the story is saying. They're clearly distant and abusive parents, they clearly set this all in motion, and I can obviously see that. And this is really a pretty small scene overall, so me acting like this reframed everything was not disingenuous, I'm always genuine, but not fair. It just didn't feel like a fair reading, and it did bother me once this video went out. And right here in this revision I was gonna make a joke like, well, I guess this means I have no choice but to like this movie more now. But, I mean, I put so much emphasis on this element that I now feel is pretty insignificant that, yeah, I do feel like I like it more now. Because everything else I said still stands. I like the portrayal of anger, I like the complexity, and while I really do like versions of Penguin that kind of skirt the edge and eventually end up being less horrible, I like how hopeless this one is. He's tragic and awful at the same time. That's hard to do convincingly. I'm probably gonna have to review this movie fully at some point and talk about all of the other elements too, because I like the rest of them as well. But yeah, this was growing as a person, I guess. I wanted to change this. There's a lot of individual scenes that I really love in it too. I love the scene in the graveyard. There's this real moment of closure with no dialogue. I honestly don't even have an analysis for the emotions that he must be feeling. The payoff, the anger, the betrayal, the new sense of identity, probably all of that, but he's very clearly not interested in communicating how he really feels about it. It feels like we're looking at a very private moment, just like the in-universe crowd out here. It's framed perfectly, and then he snaps right back into this fake persona that Max has given him. The juxtaposition is cool, and it's a nice moment of actual complexity that comes across exactly how it's supposed to. It's also one of the main bits of music I used for my last video, and it's one of my favorites. This is extremely specific, but I also like the black ooze that keeps coming out of his mouth. That sounds weird, let me explain. I don't know if there was any symbolic reason behind it, or if it was just to be gross. Probably the latter. But my friend and I have a concept that we call the rot, usually spelled THA space ROT, which is basically any kind of physical representation of moral decay. I think the portrait of Dorian Gray. That rhymed. But I think this is a really potent one, because I view it as what happens when you let resentment overrun your physical being like a sickness until your soul physically rots. He can't speak without it coming out and flicking on people, it just spills out of him. I like it as a metaphor, even if it wasn't meant to be one.
Well, I'm out of here. Goodbye, everyone.
Another version I wanted to mention was the 2004 series. I was initially not a fan of this show at all. I thought it was really goofy, but it's actually grown on me quite a bit. It's just really got some good writing in it. Yin, Clayface, Kirk, and Alfred, weirdly enough, are some of my favorite adaptations. Alfred especially. They gave him his own shit to do. They let him leave the house. It rules. But Oswald's pretty cool too. They did something really interesting and underutilized with him by making him a way more direct parallel to Bruce. Most of the rogues, in a lot of versions, are analogous to Batman in some way, but not many to Bruce. 2004 uses the backstory of Oswald's family being another of the old money founding bloodlines of the city, but one that's been disgraced after squandering their fortune. There's a lot of great devices they use to make him a foil. Bruce desperately wants to honor his parents' legacy in the most effective way he can, and Oswald hates his parents and what their legacy is now. It's somewhat implied that he tore up the family portrait, which I like a lot. It's not even addressed, it's just environmental storytelling in the background. Both Bruce and Oswald's family both employed Alfred's family at one point or another, with the Cobblepots lording over them and the Waynes being close and trusted friends. Another bit I think is really interesting is that Oswald shows back up because he's been away learning different fighting techniques around Asia. This is very specific to this version, and it's never something given to this character before or since as far as I'm aware, but it is something that's an extremely common backstory for Bruce. They really want to hammer home how easy it would be for Bruce to become something similar to Oswald if he let himself succumb to this level of bitterness. I think it's really cool and really effective most of the time. It's also a closer animated adaptation of DeVito's version than Williams is, I think. It has the general look and the characterization this time too. I also theorized that his design was at least somewhat based on London After Midnight, though I have nothing to back that up and no symbolic reason that it would be that way. Just look at them. At least that's how I rationalize this design. It's not my favorite. I like the idea of one being based off of a rockhopper penguin this time, but I honestly didn't connect those dots until someone told me that was the intention, because rockhopper penguins are black, white, and yellow, and not gray, and orange. I don't think it comes across, and I also really don't understand the teeth. He looks like his main goal is to blow up, and then act like I don't know nobody. I do think it's silly that in this show, everyone fights real good, especially since a lot of Batman's rogues are intellect-based more than being brawlers, and this does include Oswald. But again, the way it's portrayed is pretty solid. The reveal that the fat, ugly little man is a genuine physical threat isn't a joke at all. It's, oh fuck, he's about to kick my ass. And it's really effective. Using the umbrellas as creative melee weapons instead of just guns and knives is also new and interesting. 2004 Oswald kind of functions as a microcosm of how I feel about this series. The look is goofy and incongruent in a lot of ways. It's silly that everyone can do martial arts and backflips and shit, but the writing itself can be really good, and makes it worth a watch in my opinion.
I am an aristocrat of crookery, my dear man.
I don't have a ton to say about the 60s version of Penguin. I have more thoughts about the show as a whole that I'm probably going to talk about at some point. But to summarize, I don't think people give this adaptation enough credit for shaping these characters early on. There's a lot that comes from this series specifically, visually and in characterization. The example I'll use here is the noises Penguin makes, primarily his laugh. It's a pretty common quirk for the character at this point, but it didn't come from the early comics like I initially thought it did. It was a choice that Burgess Meredith made himself, kind of for a terrible reason. See, he didn't smoke, which, given the period, is kind of impressive, but apparently he is just trying not to cough constantly. That's what this is a cover for. Half character choice, half just dying on screen. And if you go back and watch this show with this in mind, it's pretty obvious. He never inhales this shit, he literally holds it in his teeth and every so often lets out a toxic cloud that just floats around his head. He also never taps his ash out, and it stresses me out more than I can describe. Jesus fucking Christ, look at it. Oh, it fell. Good God, this set is foam, it's gonna catch on fire. This is worse than The Shining. I tried to research this one a little bit as the officially endorsed favorite, but I really couldn't get into it that much. The bottle is terrible and awesome. It's a really creative, gory twist on the character's classic design. This look overall is alright, but again, not super memorable to me, especially not this one. Without either a hat or hair, this one straight up just looks like it hasn't rendered entirely yet. But apparently they just redesigned him again? Jesus Christ, no one can make up their mind with this guy. This version is my favorite though. I'm surprised we haven't seen more nautical themed designs. This one rules. For some reason it reminds me of Ian McNeice, which is not a bad thing. I actually think he'd be a great British casting for Penguin. Characterization wise though, I don't have a lot to say. It's pretty basic. Probably the most comic accurate version, all things considered. He's successful and resourceful, but absolutely the most scummy and underhanded person it's possible to be. I like that he uses a cruise ship to circumvent US law that is dangerously close to being plausible in real life. And I like that the boat itself was initially named after Burgess Meredith. That's just a nice little lore nod. He's a strong contender for sure. I really have to agree with Alan Burnett. But that doesn't mean he's super interesting to talk about. He fits perfectly with the game he's in, but I really think this is just a personal story preference. I like the tragic character studies more than the way you design a video game boss. I would admittedly still go on the Death cruise ship though. It'd be like surviving Action Park, like I just need to have the story.
Who is this? Who is this?
I'm putting these seemingly unrelated adaptations together in a category that I'm calling completely unrelated guys, where if you can change the name and not know what character it's supposed to be, then I don't care about them or even consider them related. I'm sorry, these are just dudes. Especially Telltale, what even happened here? Who is this? I did like Colin Farrell though. I just wouldn't have connected him with Penguin if the movie hadn't explicitly told me. And I wouldn't mind that if they did something interesting, but they didn't really. He's a fun side character in the story, I'm just not really invested in wanting to know more about him. 2022's The Batman, not to be confused with 2004's The Batman, is a pretty basic stone-cold serious crime thriller with a basic stone-cold serious gangster supporting character. I may be this bitch's #1 fan, and even I don't care about the show that's coming out that's centered around him, because there's literally nothing about him that's related to the lore that I'm interested in. None of the look and therefore none of the related conflict. And I'll be real, I don't get the prosthetics either. They look phenomenal, but like why? It made sense in Batman Returns, that was basically fantasy makeup. But why would you hire a dude and put him in full-face makeup that looks like another real guy? And I know it's another real guy because it's Richard Kind. I'm not the first person to say this by a long shot, but 2022 Penguin really looks like Richard Kind in a lot of scenes. It's kind of weird, frankly. And again, he worked in the story that he was a part of, but I'm really just not interested in learning more. So these two go at the bottom of my list for just being boring. And I think, hopefully, that finally exhausts all of my thoughts I have on this guy. Thank you to everyone again for watching both of these videos and for the feedback I got. I really do appreciate it. And like I said, I have a few more videos that I'm working on right now. But moving forward, just to be honest, it's not all gonna be Batman or comic stuff. Probably some, but my main bread and butter is more animation, cartoons, and weird, shitty movies. So if that's your jam, subscribe, and hopefully those will be out soon. Yeah, that's all I have for this one. Thank you guys.